My name is Susan Davis. I'm a member of the English Department, and one of the most wonderful things about being part of this department is that we get to share our writing with one another. And so the 4 readers tonight have been either recently published or have just finished a degree, sometimes both. And so let me introduce to you our first reader, and that is Alyssa Jewell. Alyssa has been teaching ESL. Oh wait, I've got to roll back. Marianne told me, remember to tell them, if you need a parking pass to get out, just see me or Marianne over there. And if you're a student and you need to have proof, if your professor isn't actually here, there are some things on this round table over here and pens, and you can just get one of us to sign it. You could probably even sign it yourself. I didn't say that. Okay, I think that's business out of the way. All right, here we go again. Alyssa. Alyssa Jewell has been teaching ESL, creative writing, and composition courses at GRCC for 14 years. She graduated with a PhD in creative writing and poetry in December 2024 from Western Michigan University. Where she was the winner of the All-University Award in Creative Research and Scholarship. She edits poetry for Waxwing and coordinates the Poets in Print reading series for the Kalamazoo Book Arts Center. Her recent poems have appeared in Cherry Tree, The Shore, Witness, and Virginia Quarterly Review. And she has received support from the Vermont Studio Center. Please welcome Alyssa Jewell.
All right, thank you for that warm welcome, Susan, and thank you to Marianne for coordinating all of this, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight and supporting writing at GRCC. I'll just read to you a few poems from my dissertation manuscript, which was a full-length poetry collection. The poems kind of follow geographical landscapes, kind of moving from a western terrain back to Michigan, poems that explore ideas about home and place and different concepts and understandings about home. This first poem is called A Crossing at the Rio Grande. They stretch in a show of all that matters, the rider's arms and hands long across the river's face, as if to touch cotton lint voices the sound of home. This is how we become slighter. Out of the sky's green summer darkness, a body rolls onto a different shore, waves turn back as a scroll, ink drenched with trying to write new life. Did I ever know about hunger, the way it burrows into the heart? In my own city, I saw wanting cracked open, a purple shell, soft and held to the light like a child, offering up his first painting in an act of trust. New alphabets traced in smudged pencil, blackened fingers pointing homeward on a map. I stood, knees yielding under cross currents, looked to see if someone else was watching too, wanted another to take account of the horses' constant forward through the flood and slag, to remember the way they vanished like copper needles into the trees. This next poem I wrote during quarantine and COVID, just kind of playing on some of the tensions of just being at home and looking out the window and all the things that our minds go through. All right, this is called Window Blind. The white slap of the moon after hail gone through ivy to silver April's first green blades. There I listened for the really real, while the quick clouds passed overhead, because it looked like the world shifting black, white, gray through the howls of the night had something to tell me about making a home of it. how to hold the hand of someone who is afraid. In elementary school, an aging farmer patiently answered questions about the combine that sent his arm back to dust, while our teacher shuddered in the library's doorway, the rest of us transfixed without embarrassment, as if the man's story could save our own young lives, the parts of us that were already leaving, feeling but not knowing that a child carries 300 bones at birth, loses 60 of them, and often in the spring months when one senses the muscles stretching to a refined sheen in a body that will need to set up camp for a while, along a shoreline hissing and beating wind-blown and wood-swept by some cold sea goddess coasting inland to show a passerby how to magnetize the sun to the rocks, to call it down. Immense energy, slow honey burning up algae and root, a demonstration in how to adjust to a realm of excess briefly and without hesitation. This next poem I wrote while doing some family research into some ancestry and was reading about my third great-grandfather and just his story of moving from Virginia to Michigan. This is called Against Cultivar, after Philip Lawson, 1859 to 1936. The chicken proves accurate in its back and forth, the way I traveled up from Virginia backward on boat, rail, and foot, never acting on that deep knowing turn gnawing in the jawbone, then belly. This life is beautiful, touchable, and not for me. And life, let it be said, never teaches you to hate yourself. You learn this excavation on your own borrowed time, though never learn to loathe the breathing sky. Something common in the blue-gold atmosphere opening above your riverbank bedside in the years of no home. Though I called out for one, like my arrival in that ineffable space was certain, so that when I finally parted a patch of Michigan grassland tall against my thigh, I leaned low to inspect the soil and rock that never belonged to me, turned it over in my hand gently like my mother, and her mother before me, until all the horizon was line and dot, exhausted, hungry sparrows that could fall from the sky for a single act of love. And I have one more poem that is actually not in my manuscript. I wrote it last spring in a poetry forms class, and we were looking at Harriet Mullen, who's a very sonorous writer, lots of play with sound and words, and so this comes after reading her work. It's an exploration of home, particularly the home that I grew up in with my grandparents. I lived with them for about 10 years, and they were selling their home around this time last year. We were getting it ready for an estate sale because they were going into a nursing home. My grandmother is 93 now. My grandfather passed away 2 weeks ago today, and so I wanted to read this in his honor of that time that we spent together in that home. Okay. At the end of an age, we sell and leave. Let's celebrate the end of all things in late September, those last days in our home we lived like kings. Remember too, late fall, early December, lasagna, ricotta, morellos, cornichons, and picked clean chicken wings. On a bone plate just to the right of clouds in green glass bowls, cradling pistachios by the pound. We were skeleton frames and round bodies thick in moonlight, lovesick, dream-tick where time logic doesn't stick like this glitter on our hands. The field is yellow. Stand in the creekside's late-day haze, mud mazed through our scalps. We worked the land, coreopsis, cosmos, rose, morning glory burst, cucumber rose, green bean rose, rows of feed corn, and slow, slow mornings tumbling down the hillside. Oh, how I love what the day offered us to waste it away. Egg carton boats, newspaper parade floats, and heads of paper mache, woolen wigs shown off for starlight or for sun biting the cold off coconut cream, red wild oat and root beer rising to sting our noses with the stuff decades are made of, Max Headroom and Poison Perfume, Obsession, Max Factor, Lip Smacker, and June Carter Cash, then further back slabs of record on the Edison, Static and Spin, sing it with the ukulele and see that I love you, I love you, I love you, poured now into watering cans for sale, mason jars and blue bottles, in tubs for long gone dirt and seed packets the neighbors pick through, in slipshod green-orange rust root cellar. In the almost right attic, its cracked roof and bat wings, bat backs, bumblebee thorax, cedar packs and thumbtacked curtains keeping out the light, the kitchen appliances buzzing swollen and stale with dust over ceramic apples and plastic pears, this vanitas, this two-swept garage like our minds, wonderstruck, our emptying bodies that can never hold enough. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Beautiful. Our next reader is Marianne Lessert. Marianne's first novel, Base 10, by the Feminist Press, 2009, followed an astronomer's quest for self among Lake Michigan's dunes and the stars. Her 2024 novel, Landmarks, is based on 2 years of boots on well sites research on fracking in our state forests. Landmarks has been named a Forward Indies finalist for Book of the Year in fiction. Marianne's articles have appeared in EcoWatch and In These Times, and she is a regular presenter on art and activism. She teaches composition and creative writing at GRCC. You can find her at mariannelessert.com and right here.
So I'm going to read part of the first chapter, and I want to start by saying this novel is dedicated to very real, very everyday people who worked in the 2010s especially to protect our state forests from fracking or horizontal hydraulic fracturing. The other thing I'll say is the narrator is a professor, and if any of you are my students, just know that I don't feel about your work the way that she feels about her students. In the opening, she's a little tired. And you're going to hear about, you're going to enter the first chapter because one of her former students has just been arrested, and then I'll skip to the end of the chapter. So it's called TV Ticker. I don't know why I turned on the television in the first place, except to provide a little white noise. It was that time of the semester when the essays were piling up, and I had heard more about my students' lives and their problems than I could possibly carry. Couldn't they see the stack of essays I was hauling away from class? After teaching all day and into the night, I didn't want to remember the excuses or the hardships. I wanted noise, simple white noise. I climbed the dark carpeted steps of my second-story apartment, thinking about the one man who had ever shared the space with me. It was Sam who suggested the golden yellow color we painted the entryway and dinette. Recalling our better days, I strolled through my tiny dinette, loving those golden yellow walls and the drop-sided table with 2 wooden chairs. I knew what I was doing, indulging in the escapism of romance. This was the time in every semester when I started thinking about getting a dog, maybe even dating again. Sam had been so attuned to color. The landlord loved the pinky salmon he'd picked out to trim the exterior window casings. She said they made the windows pop, and she credited me 2 months' rent. But Sam was fit and active, and he loved to be outdoors. But I soon discovered that he didn't love the trees or the darkness of wet soil or the way different trees let go of water. He moved through the outdoors, preferably on wheels and as fast as possible. Why I needed to stand under a white pine, touching its trunk with one hand and my heart with the other, was something he would never understand. I opened one of those tart red wine beers and passed back through that golden yellow dinette before I paid the television any attention. But as soon as I saw the face on the screen, the smooth beige of her skin and the short haircut that brought her sandy brown hair up in curls, I knew it was Sonia. One of them had finally done it, gotten themselves arrested. The Live at 11 teaser began with a quick zoom to a headshot of Sonia. It was oddly small, as if the station had gotten hold of a school or license photo and quickly scanned it in. But her classically proportioned face, the smile that could have come from an archaic Greek sculpture, was unmistakable. The text ran again: woman arrested, possibly child, Northern Michigan frack well site, before a live shot of what looked to be a tree-lined clearing. I sat forward, scanning the graying bands of darkness that faded back from the light stack on the news truck, searching for the telltale pink and orange flags, the lights, the noise of a well pad, but there was nothing. Justin Thompson, the same spiky-haired reporter who had covered their winter campout, swept his arm over a dark, empty field as he entered the shot, backed by a tree line like any in northern Michigan, mixed hardwoods and pines. Justin Thompson, reporting from a northern county frack well site where at least one person has been arrested in what appears to be attempted sabotage. Stay tuned for the full report at 11. Had they somehow managed to get Thompson into their fold? He had to have known to end up hitting the story from what appeared to be a half-empty, excavated field. They were good. I had been exceptionally proud of the protests and events they had planned. But I also knew, as they stepped closer and closer to direct action, how things could go wrong. Were they trusting a news guy to wait for the right time? What a coup that would be. Thompson had seemed sympathetic when he'd covered their winter campout. He'd gotten quite a bit of screen time, too, thanks to the bizarre thunderstorms that came out of January's snow clouds. He called the report Environmentalists Occupy Frack Well Site. And for a new reporter, he'd gotten some unforgettable shots. In one day's time, temperatures had plummeted, falling from nearly 60 degrees to near zero, ending a heat streak that was way too warm for a January thaw. Snow clouds rolled in off the lake, filled with pinkish red lightning, and a rather new meteorological term came into vogue: thunder snow. The icy snow blowing across the field as a constant presence held on to light and sound for long periods of time, elongating the rumble of thunder and the lightning's eerie pink glow. But now it was Sonia's wide face and her frizzy curls being plastered all over the screen, and the smeary scanned image wasn't making me feel any better. Why no mugshot? Had they already moved her? By 11 o'clock, the drive for drama would have quiet but quizzical Sonia transformed into an eco-terrorist apprehended in the middle of an extensive plot. I knew they would do it, didn't I? Something big. I never knew what exactly or when, but I always knew they were serious and that anything they decided to do would be done out of reverence, out of love. I had listened to their ideas on Sonia's mangy back deck and helped them shape their thoughts as they continued to write. There were times when I thought of Mara, when Mara and I were young like they were, when we acted as a pair. Perhaps I should have told Kate and Brett and Sonia and Mark more. But whatever it was I was becoming, mentor or friend, I had been their professor, and that role stuck. I was worried about influence. Now the question was, had I dropped out on them when they needed me most? Was I wrong not letting them know that their professor, Rebecca Walton, had once been known as Elizabeth Stone, a rescue climber and writer inside of Actions? That I understood completely why they needed to keep quiet, because being a good activist was not so different from being a good teacher. I had walked into teaching not knowing that this role, too, would require me to push back my sense of self so I could be a better listener. Both roles, each in their own way, required good secret keeping. For all my worry about influence, all I wanted now was a chance to intercept, to stop the messaging train. They had tried. For 2 years they had tried, with articles, with songs, with videos of the destruction we had witnessed across the state, with carefully crafted speeches and letters, by standing up at auctions and public meetings. Now they would be labeled. Anyone who doesn't understand how 4 promising students in a literature class could become eco-terrorists should stand at the crest of the 12-foot-tall mound of earth surrounding a frack well site, a berm swollen with and smelling of still living roots. Let anyone quick to judge gaze across 10 acres of forest floor scraped level and dry. Let them see and hear, smell and feel the screech of the drill rig biting into brain and bone, the chug of diesel engines, the roar of compressors. Let them stand there trying to comprehend the circus of hoses and coils, the tanks and the vats, the piles and piles and half-ton cylinders of pipe, because there is no such thing as a 2-mile-long pipe. The pipes of drilling and fracking thunder end to end as they descend into the wellbore, segment following segment, and the drill bit grinds away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. What amazes me is that all of the readers today have produced and published these works while holding a full-time job, reading hundreds and hundreds of student papers every semester. They're walking the walk. I would like to introduce next Rachel Lutwick-Diener. Rachel enjoys a bookish life. She has earned degrees from Colgate University, North Carolina State University, and Queen's University of Charlotte. She currently teaches writing and literature at Grand Rapids Community College. Rachel delights in writing essays that challenge and affirm her readers, and her ultimate goal is to make people laugh, even uncomfortably. Rachel's recent publications can be found at Chaotic Merge, Door Ajar, Door is Ajar, thank you, and Story Sanctum. Her book reviews can be found at Southern Review of Books and on Instagram at Professor LD. Rachel.
Thank you, Susan. I want to thank my dad who came here from Chicago, but also my really amazing students. And they're like really great writers, and they're going to be up here one day. I know it. So the first piece that I'm going to share with you was published this winter in a collection called The Writer's Journal, Live and Learn. And I got to writing this piece because in high school, I took French. And then I grew up and had a daughter who is a Spanish major, and she lived in Ecuador for 8 months. And she said, "Mom, you got to go on Duolingo." This piece is called Duolingo Taught Me. Duolingo taught me early on, to my skepticism, that hamburguesa de pescado con queso, fish burgers with cheese, ew, enfermo, are an integral part of a beginning Spanish speaker's diet. The word for pen is bolígrafo, the monosyllable we spit on the page unfurling a lovely ballpoint. The word for film is película, but movie is cine, as I will be quizzed on semana after semana. Mi madre is both inteligente and elegante, in direct opposition of my teens' assessment of me, the worst. Usted, that asshole of a construction that I get wrong, todos los días, despite asking my fully fluent daughter for clarification. Is it vous en français? Should I Google? It's okay to not want to limpiar the habitación, but frankly, you're kind of gross if you don't té duche en la mañana. You might limit your career goals at first. You can either trabajar en la fábrica or el hospital, but later, you might want to tiene un trabajo en la escuela, as a maestra. By the frequency that I am asked to identify a cine and a película, that I should question my life choices to leer all my libros and escribir as much as I do, because screen after screen, gems accruing, I match movies and cine and movies, and it only takes 180 días of Duolingo to have a stilted conversation with my daughter's Ecuadorian host mother, that Mommy Ruth will smile awkwardly when I declare, "Mi amo Ecuador." But my son will mutter, "You just said, my name is Ecuador." Despite my streak of over 340 days, I will wake up to a semi-threatening reminder from Lily, that bitchy chica with purple hair, that I don't want to drop out of the Emerald League, that Hitoshi or Esperanza are about to edge me out, que triste, that I shouldn't be upset if I lose my heart to my mistake after mistake, after mistake, hablaring or hablowing mi español, because tomorrow there will be más duo, más cine, más usted, más madres inteligente and elegante, at least for now. And every dia I should gamely just keep aprender.
The lady in red has arrived, our own Morsalata Muhammad, and I'm pleased to introduce her. Morsalata's writing is deeply rooted in her experiences as an educator whose early life was marked by various academic environments, from home and private schooling to graduating from a public school in Detroit, Michigan. Dr. Muhammad's commitment to social justice, intersectionality, and historical consciousness informs her teaching, writing, which is creative, nonfiction, and scholarly, and research perspective in ways that emphasize the importance of humanizing educational practices. Recent publications include the poem BG 2024 and the essay Ideologies and Evolution in Representing Malcolm X for Young Readers, forthcoming in 2025 from Third World Press. Morsalada Muhammad.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being patient. I was in class, so I have a 1 day a week virtual first year writing class, and they are working on a research paper. And I was not able to secure a sub, and this is not the week that they can miss a class. So that's why I was a little tardy. Okay, so I'm gonna just read, I'm gonna start my timer here so I can not have you waiting for me any longer than you already have been. So I haven't published a lot of poetry in a while. Just been busy doing my homework. Oh yes, I graduated last year, so I'm now Dr. Muhammad. You can go for that. So I was, busy doing homework. But the last two poems that I did publish, they have been about war. So that can take a lot out of you. And I did not seek either one of them. G.F. Gorick put together Busy Griefs, Raw Towns, a poetic response to the brutality of the war in Ukraine a few years ago. And he reached out to me and said, hey, you want to write something for this? I'm like, no, not really. It's kind of really sad. So I don't know. I don't just have war poetry hanging around. But I said, if I can get something that seems, useful, I will put it in. So I'll share that. And then I have this latest poem that just came out the end of last year. It's called For Gaza's Children. Black, brown, and Jewish writers and poets speak out. Did not go looking for that one either. I just know one of the editors from graduate school, and he was like, hey, we're putting this book together. I think you should be in it. And I don't know, that's just a couple years in a row with two guys I know saying, do you just have war poetry? No, I don't, but I did create something. So here's the first one. It's called, this is from Busy Griefs, Raw Towns, the response to the war in Ukraine. A dyslexic follows the war on Ukraine. Her brain pushes through the weird collection of familiar letters, an alphabet turned against itself in her mind. Oddly similar to early memories of learning to read in a world that cared little for her excellent observational and systemic thinking skills. Blinking back tears, she breathes heavily. The marginalizing, unforgiving past with its phonetic, demanding, archaic social system comes barreling back from November 30th, 1991, morphing into a fucking now. Her eyes scramble across the words, diallo, isium, Shasu, Carmina, misfiring, disintegrating, the coping mechanisms she's crafted meticulously over decades. There's no place to go but into the madness of violence heightened in too many news stories. So she leans into the latest version of inhumanity, grasping at tyranny's coattails. It's her Hail Mary attempt to reconcile the combinations, Koenig, Kramatorsk, Floyd, Rebizhin, Gray, Sivers, Ellis, Donsky, Taylor, Maripal, Dubose, Slavinik, Gurley, Herlika, Leola, coaxing her brain to loosen her tongue enough to produce audible sounds. Noises become sounds. Sounds become names where children die. Sludgingly, she makes her way into not so pretty mismatched pronunciations, finally arriving at saying the names of towns and individuals. Saying the names turns people back into humans, making her more humane. Saying their names turns her vicious enough to pounce upon tyranny. Saying their names makes her so desperate for human literacy that no level of alphabetical defamiliarization keeps her from reading what is just. Saying their names helps her muster the strength to face the wrath. Saying their names helps her muster the strength to face the wrath of children expecting more from today and tomorrow. And that was the one for Ukraine. This one for Gaza's children, Black, brown, and Jewish writers and poets speak out. BG. 7. She holds tightly to slivers of memory, each one a fraying fabric, losing its color and sensory connection to the deep rootedness of what made her a child. Each thread unraveling the childhood collection of small, priceless gifts her mother cobbled together, a smile, a wink, a song mother only sang in the BG before genocide time. So yeah, I didn't just have those laying around. I'm gonna finish with a part of the essay that's coming out, Ideologies and Evolution of Representing Malcolm X for Young Readers. I'm only gonna read part of it because it's an essay. When I was asked to participate in this, it is in a collection of 10 other writers who are writing about just the representation of Malcolm X in our culture, in our psyche, in our world, because this year would be his 100th birthday. So this will come out in May. And I'm in here with, oh my goodness. I have a colleague who works here and I just can't. Thank you. Lindsay Burton. It also has an essay in here. We started out trying to work it jointly together, and we both look at literature in the presence of Malcolm X in literature. So I'll just read part of this, and hopefully you'll look for it when it comes out. In his autobiography, Malcolm X credits much of the opening of his mind to the self-education opportunity he received in prison. He describes his exposure to the relatively robust library at the Norfolk prison colony as one that granted him a newfound freedom, and he indicates the books he consumed during his time in prison, emphasizing the impact of reading about Black people, Black culture, and Black history from authors such as W.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, along with pamphlets from the Abolitionist Anti-Slavery Society of New England. Although he read widely from non-Black authors too, Malcolm conveys a strong sense of identity, development, and emotional influence from reading about his own culture. His experience exemplifies the importance of access to diverse narratives, which has been an issue within the academic publishing world of children's literature since the Civil Rights era. Dr. Bishop, in a talk given at California State University, outlined the need for diverse representation in children's literature with her now famous metaphors of books as windows and mirrors. Despite Bishop's keen insight and popularity of her metaphors within and beyond academia's representation of diverse, that is, non-white cultures in American publishing limping along reliably anemic. Indeed, nearly a quarter century after her talk, Walter Dean Myers and his son wrote companion pieces in the New York Times titled, "Where Are the People of Color in Children's Books?" and "The Apartheid of Children's Literature." Framing Childhood Through Trauma, the Deficit Lens. Books for children about Malcolm X have been available since the 1970s. They offer an introduction to his profound impact on U.S. civil rights history, presenting him as a historical figure and an inspiring model of resilience and transformation. In addition, these books employ visual elements along with timelines and simplified language to guide young readers through Malcolm X's journey, making his story relatable while fostering an early understanding of historical context. However, in short, they also frame his childhood as a deficit narrative. The stories of Malcolm X's formative years, birth through 14, focus almost exclusively on a series of traumatic events his parents and his siblings experienced in the Midwest. The books highlight the turbulence, anger, and violence. They are narrated as if the social justice activism Malcolm Little grew to become involved in was a process rooted primarily in traumatic, adverse childhood experiences. So that's just a little introduction of that piece. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Marcelata. Thank you to all of our readers and all of their creativity for sharing your work and your lives in your writing. Now we have an opportunity to ask questions. Marianne is going to be the microphone runner. And so I'll just open it up by saying, does anybody have a question they would like to ask of either the group of writers or individual writers? We'd love to hear from you.
Yes.
I have a question for Rachel about the last piece, and you talked about a particular style of format that you used. Can you talk more about that?
I might have to ask my students for help because they've been working on the Pantoum form more recently than I have. But I will say that when a writer chooses to use a form, whichever form it is, there's like a classical rule for what that's going to look like. And the Pantoum is like A, B, C, and a D, and then in the next line, there's a repetition, right? Right. Marianne, do you even remember?
I think of it as 1, 2, 3, 4.
Uh-huh.
And after the first stanza, the lines 2 and 3 become, or 2 and 4 become 1 and 3 in the next one, and that continues, and you can vary them a little.
Right. It's very mathematical. And when I did it, I had to create like an outline for myself that had that rule. And I was doing a lot of cutting and pasting, and I didn't follow it exactly. If you look at my piece, you'll see that I made a few small changes in the repeating lines. And I think what you heard is really like 3 Pantoums back to back. But it's just choosing a form as an envelope creates kind of like you're constricted a little bit, but that also then generates creativity and is a lot of fun. Thanks for asking the question.
Did I do okay? I think so.
Another question of any of the writers. Oh, there's one at the middle.
For you, Ms. Lacerte, what made you choose forest fracking as the topic of your book? Like, I'm not quite sure what forest fracking is. That just like deforestation? Forest fracking.
So I have always been very much connected to the natural world. I don't believe in a hierarchy where humans sit above the natural world. I think of us as part of it. So in the early 2010s, I learned that horizontal hydraulic fracturing was happening in Michigan. It was a process that I was interested as a writer who followed environmental issues. And so for the first couple of years, I just was, I think my bio talked about boots on well sites research. I literally, with my camera and my pen, just went out to every frac well site that was operating in the forest. And I was concerned because most of the fracking that was happening in Michigan was happening on state forest land that we think of as protected and public. And so through the process of my research, I found out how oil and gas leasing works, where the oil and gas industry can nominate pieces of land, public land that we think can't be developed in this way, and it can be developed. So I was just very curious about how public land was being used for oil and gas development without the public's knowledge. So that's what sent me out there in the first place, to try and get the word out. And then I wrote the novel later because I was just so amazed at how people from all different types of lived experiences and backgrounds came together and worked together for years. They were like this education and awareness force that came together. And nobody asked about voting records. I'm sure if you did, our voting records would have been wildly different. I mean, there was water well drillers, indigenous community members, lawyers, doctors, teachers, students, musicians, artists, you name it. So that's what, first the drive to find out what is going on, and then the drive to tell the story of these people.
Wonderful questions. The bar is pretty high. Okay, not to frighten you, but we would love to hear other questions.
Getting there.
I have a question about publishing. So people write for all different reasons, to journal, to understand themselves, the world. How do you start down the road of publishing your work? What are like the basic steps, if there are any? That's to any and all of the writers.
Shall I start with Alyssa? Alyssa, you want to start that one?
Yeah, that's something I'm really interested in, just because I edit for a journal. I think one good place to start is to just kind of do some research and read the journals. There's so many that are available for free online, and just kind of get a feel for what's out there, and do your research. I've spent countless hours researching places to publish my work, so I think it almost became like a hobby for me. And I just kind of look at it as like I spent time in my creative process, I spent time working on this, and to me it's almost like looking out for yourself in a way, and honoring that time and saying like other people should read it, like give other people a chance to see what you've been pouring yourself into for so long. And don't give up, because I think I was probably rejected like 100 times before I was published. So, yeah. Sorry,
excuse me. Marcelata?
I'm not very good at it. Because my approach to it is like, it takes a lot of time. I'm prone to doing research. So I actually got a residency with Thomas Lynch a couple years ago, and it came with you get this part first and then get the other part once you published. And it's just a daunting process for me. It if I didn't have, like, I guess, my full-time job and other things to occupy my time, maybe I could. But for me, publishing all comes down to, I have a matrix. There are deadlines. You got to learn about the journal that you want to be in. You got to read about it, see if where your things fit in. And I do all that, and then I'm like, I'm just going to send it anyway. But so, yeah, most of my opportunities to publish have been in like anthologies, and it's because it's through academia. I know other people, and they're like, we're putting this together, we're looking for voices, and I'll usually put a call out. I'm like, hey, I know somebody is looking for something, and I'll invite other people to that party. I think for me, it's just it's time consuming, and I'd rather just like spend time, keep working on my pieces. I think once I get, maybe when I retire, I'll have time just to think about publishing. But I never wanted to, for me, like publishing for publishing's sake has not really ever been interesting, because it's a lot of me, the emotion, what it takes out. Like even just reading today, that's an emotional thing. And when you put something out, you got to be ready to represent it. You got to be able to ready to show up for it. And it takes a lot of energy. So even after being published, that's a part of myself that I'm sharing with the world. And every time I show up to say something, it's a lot. So, but yeah, I agree with everything Liz said. It takes work.
Thanks. Rachel?
This is a preview of what's coming in week 14, friends. So just hold on to your hats. So I want to echo what my colleagues have said about like how much time it takes. And really, generating and revising creative work is such a joy, and figuring out where to publish it and preparing your piece for publication sucks that joy out of you. But for students out there who are thinking, gosh, I'd love to find a home for some of my pieces, what I recommend as a starting place is this newsletter that's called Authors Publish. It's a free newsletter that you can sign up for. And they have weekly and monthly newsletters that they'll send right to your email box. And some of them you'll just disregard, like 13 places that are publishing Halloween stories. But like, for instance, this week there was 35 places publishing creative nonfiction. So I emailed it to myself, of course, right? So that I could remember that I had it. And then I'll go back and I'll read through, how do these journals describe themselves? What are they looking for? Is it long form? Is it short form? Sometimes something thematically will stand out, and then I'll decide, okay, I think I have a piece that matches that, and so then I'll look a little bit farther. So I learn about journals that way, as Alyssa was saying, like you do research, you get to know journals. Then once you think like, oh, that's kind of a cool journal, you might follow them on social media, because maybe that journal looks good to you, but you know what? Their publication window may have closed already and it's not opening up for another year or another 3 months or something like that. So even when you find what seems like the journal that most perfectly captures the heart of your work, it's not always easy to just sort of send out the piece. You wind up having to spend a lot of time like crafting a bio for yourself. And I'm sure this is the same thing for you, Alyssa. It's like, I have a bio of myself that is 40 words. I have one that's 50 words. I have one that's 75 words. I've got the 200-word bio, right? So like, what am I going to include in a bio, that represents me, that is like a little bit serious, because my instinct is to just say something ridiculous like, Rachel lives in Grand Rapids with her 3 children and 2 coffee makers. But you have to be professional and also like reflect the image of the journal. So I also think like the flip side of all these calls for publication is that sometimes it can inspire you to do something that you haven't done before, right? Like you may learn of different like subgenres of fantasy fiction and think like, that sounds so cool, I want to try it. And so calls for submission become writing invitations. So that maybe you don't meet the deadline for that journal's call for submissions, but it gets you to keep writing. And it's also heartening to see everything that's out there.
I'll add for students, there's quite a few organizations. Rachel mentioned Authors Publish, Poets and Writers, poetsandwriters.org. They have an online database that you can look at. You don't have to have a subscription. The same with the Council of Literary Magazines and Presses. They have online lists where you can look for people looking for fiction, poetry, you name it. But by and by, publishing a novel is very different than publishing short work. You have to have it completely finished before you even begin to reach out to agents or editors and different presses. So it's a different world, but if somebody wants to know more about that, I'd be happy to talk about it. But basically, even for a novelist, you look for something, a chapter, for instance, or a particular scene that could make a nice standalone piece. And when you're working on a novel for years, you try to publish little snippets of it as short stories. And that's what I did while Landmarks was happening.
Any more thoughts, questions?
Is this for Grant? Yeah. All right.
So for the students too, there's Display Magazine. We have a competition here at GRCC for student artwork and poetry and fiction. I'd encourage you to take a look at those.
I can't believe, as a former display faculty advisor, I totally forgot that one. Yes, display, grcc.edu/display. It's an art and literature magazine. The art department and English department equally contribute, and it's wonderful. A lot of creative writing students, a lot of artists get their first publications there. And it's digitally archived through the library, so your work lasts forever. And you can come back and get it anytime. So yes, display, display, display. Thanks, Grant.
I will also say that a number of our faculty in the English department who were students here once upon a long time ago have been published in Display. That was their first, and now look at what they're doing. So it's a beautiful publication. And you'll be asked to sign it so we can put it in our library, and you'll be memorialized there for as long as the English department lasts. Would anyone else like to ask something? Anything you're wondering?
Maybe you can put together.
What if we could guess what we were going to ask?
I already told you mine.
I'm sure all of you are big readers, and I'm always curious, like, is your creative process fairly fixed, or is it influenced by what you're reading at the time? And if it is, are you careful about what you're reading when you're in the midst of writing? So that's for anybody who has a thought on it.
I'll start and then pass it back around. We'll go in reverse. So when I'm writing fiction, if I'm generating a new novel, I do not read other fiction. When you're getting to know a narrator and a character that you're making up, it's like this is going to sound really odd unless you're a writer in the room and you'll know. They live in your mind. It's like you have this split life. And I don't want anybody else's voice in there. I want to get to know that character. So I read a lot of nonfiction when I'm writing fiction.
To add, what about other media? Are you careful about other media you consume as well, or is it mostly just books then?
You mean like literally?
Movies that kind of like
Not,
like if you're telling a story.
not really. If I'm telling a story, I don't worry about a similar story in a different like film or, although I have seen, I'm sorry, a lot of fairly bad representation of activists in film. They just make me a little irritated. But yeah, mainly it's just reading nonfiction and staying away from that narrative voice. Once I know the narrator and I'm cruising along with the book, I don't worry about it anymore.
So I mainly write poetry because I get my like characters and things. I just run out of steam. I'm just like, what? Could just do whatever. I've written one short story, one act play, and everything else is mainly poetry. And I wrote the short story and the one act play because I was a student and I needed money. So this kind of goes with what Rachel was saying earlier. Sometimes you get motivated to do something, and there was a contest, and I was an undergrad, and I needed money. And so I entered the contest. I was like, this is not a good one act play, but it won 4th place. And then I was like, what? I can write one act plays once. So I did it once. And I did the same thing with the short story. So I know I'm capable, but the money ain't been good there. It was a kind of, but for me, mainly my inspirations usually come from like music. So I like listening to music. My introduction to poetry was rap. So growing up in the 80s in Detroit, rap music. And I look at, actually through teaching creative writing, that's kind of how I stay active. Because if I'm teaching a creative writing class, I have to try something new. And I can show my students my horrible guzzle, pantoum, and all this. Like, this really sucks. But if we can do this together. So I actually lately start to follow like a lot of songwriters because I like to analyze the songs that I like. And we have this activity that we do in class, like, why is this song stuck in my head? And I have students pick a song that they do not like at all, but they can sing. And we look at the strategies that writers use to, besides the music, to hook it in your head. And that's rich. And so, but yeah, it doesn't really come from like reading. Most of my stuff, if you haven't noticed, comes from the world around us. Like, I might get an idea and I don't want it, but the only way I can deal with it is to write about it so I can get it out.
Right on to Alyssa.
Thank you. I would say, like Marcelata, like for poetry, I just let everything, the world around me, just come in, but reading is definitely part of that too. I would just add, if I'm feeling stuck, there are like writers that I go to, poets like Linda Hall or Becky and Fritz Goldberg are some people who kind of get me writing again if I'm having a little bit of a slump, like something that just inspires me. Yeah, so I think just letting all kinds of reading come in. I'm reading nonfiction now because I'm out of the PhD program and have a chance to read some things besides poetry. And I would also just say, like, for me, one of the best things has been reading outside of my aesthetic. So if there's like a poet that I kind of don't really meld with or I'm not clicking with, I like to challenge myself and just say, like, why am I not clicking with this? And then try to appreciate it and expand my reading over time. Yeah. Rachel, I can just bring it over.
Thank you. If you know me, and I think Megan knows this about me, I read obsessively. I'm constantly reading. When I'm reading 2 and 3 books at a time, I'm listening to podcasts all day long. I do watch TV when I can, and I'm not really picky about television. And part of the reason for that is I'm really like looking around and wanting to notice like different languages and different forms that I can use to talk about like what I'm noticing about my own life. Since I primarily write creative nonfiction, and I like usually start with an experience that I've had. So like I my science education is like pretty poor. You know, I took vertebrate zoology in college and like haven't looked back, but I really like the vocabulary that goes with science. And so I had been thinking for a long time about how the language of geology and like rocks and rock formations, it was just so interesting. And then I started like looking around my basement and how messy it was and thinking about like using that language to just kind of like talk about stuff. I like to write a lot about stuff and like who's responsible for stuff, right? And cataloging it. And then I have a daughter who's a college student, and her room is like a hellscape. And before she went back to college, don't tell her this, but I like went into her room and took pictures just because like I could not believe what I was seeing. And then I was like, you know, I think that the language of the rock formations is gonna, I can talk about the mess using this tool. And then I got this idea, you know what? It's like when you go to the Carlsbad Caverns. And so then I started watching on YouTube videos of park rangers taking people through amazing geological formations and sort of like working back from there. So I'm less like worried that a character from a fiction novel is going to like creep into my work, but I am like kind of taking little gems where I think, oh, that tool will work for me. Good question, thanks. Any other questions? I'm just gonna take over now. What about my students? They're not shy.
All right, I guess that's a wrap for our event, but there's still stuff at the buffet, so have at it if you'd like.
And before you go, we want to recognize how many wonderful supporters we have out there. Students, other faculty members, retired faculty members who are here. Our dean is here, friends, and did I say family? Thank you all for supporting our writing and for being great listeners and question askers.